It was the kind of day everyone dreams about: bright blue skies, the sun gently warming the earth, and the cheerful hum of families gathered at the community pool. Laughter filled the air, blending with the rhythmic splashes of children diving into the cool, inviting water. Parents lounged by the poolside, chatting and watching their kids enjoy the carefree joys of summer. Among the crowd, the Johnson family stood out not because they sought attention, but because of the simple joy they radiated. Rachel and Marcus Johnson, a loving couple, were setting up their spot by the pool. Their daughter, Maya, carefully spread out a vibrant beach towel while her younger brother, Jaden, eagerly eyed the deep end, his inflatable shark float already in hand. It was a scene of pure harmony. A family looking to unwind, to create memories, and to simply belong. But little did they know, their peaceful day was about to take a turn. Across the pool, perched on a lounge chair, sat a woman named Karen. Her gaze lingered on the Johnson family a little too long, her expression clouded with quiet disdain. To her, they didn't belong, not here, not in her community, and certainly not at this pool. Her disapproving eyes followed their every move, as if searching for anything to confirm her suspicions. Her thoughts began to swirl, tinged with prejudice. Are they even members here? She wondered. They couldn't possibly afford this neighborhood. What began as subtle glances soon evolved into pointed stares. Karen's simmering thoughts were turning into a storm of assumptions and judgments. And then, as if fueled by an unshakable conviction, Karen made a decision. A decision that would set off a chain of events no one at the pool could have imagined. Suddenly, the scene shifts, a brief, jarring glimpse of what's to come. Flashing lights. The sound of sirens. Police officers standing by the poolside, their expressions a mix of confusion and frustration. The Johnsons are calm but visibly shaken. And Karen looks different. Gone is her smug confidence, replaced by shock, regret, and a hint of fear. A relaxing summer day turns into a nightmare for one family, when a stranger's prejudice takes center stage. What happens next will leave you stunned. The Johnson family was everything a picture perfect of family should be: loving, close-knit, and full of life. Rachel, a devoted mother with a warm smile and an easy laugh, had packed a cooler brimming with snacks for the kids. Marcus, her husband, stood tall and steady, always the first to crack a joke or suggest a fun game. Their children, Maya and Jaden, brought boundless energy to every space they entered. At the pool, they were no different. Rachel spread out their towels while Marcus helped Jaden inflate his shark float. Maya, ever the responsible older sibling, adjusted her goggles and waited patiently for her brother to join her in the water. Their laughter blended seamlessly with the sounds of summer around them, creating a moment that felt timeless. As the family settled in, it became clear they weren't strangers to the community. A few neighbors waved at them warmly, exchanging quick pleasantries. Rachel even struck up a brief conversation with a couple sitting nearby, sharing tips on where to find the best sunscreen deals. Marcus, always the social butterfly, offered to help a group of teenagers struggling with a stubborn beach umbrella. The teens thanked him with a chorus of gratitude, and for a moment it seemed like nothing could break the tranquility of the day. But not everyone was charmed by the Johnsons' presence. Across the pool, Karen sat rigid on her lounge chair, her eyes narrowing each time they flicked toward the family. She clutched a paperback novel in one hand, but her attention wasn't on the story. Her focus was laser-sharp, locked onto the Johnsons as if they were an anomaly in her perfectly curated world. Karen's thoughts began to churn. She didn't know this family had never seen them before, she told herself. That alone was enough to justify her unease. Surely they didn't live here. Surely they didn't belong. Her muttering started soft, almost imperceptible. Rules are rules, she whispered under her breath, glancing around as if seeking silent allies among the other pool-goers. We can't just let anyone in. That's how standards drop. But the Johnsons weren't paying her any mind. Maya and Jaden were now in the pool, their laughter echoing as they splashed each other playfully. Rachel had joined Marcus on the lounge chairs, the two of them sharing a moment of quiet conversation, their smiles reflecting the joy of a rare, carefree afternoon. Karen, however, couldn't let it go. Her disapproval began to spill over into visible actions, her tight-lipped expression, the way she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the occasional dramatic sigh meant to draw attention. But when none of the other patrons seemed to share her growing indignation, Karen's frustration only deepened. This is supposed to be a private pool, she murmured, louder now, as though speaking to someone. It's not a public park. We have rules for a reason. She glanced toward the lifeguard, who was preoccupied with monitoring the children in the shallow end. Why do they even check memberships anymore? She muttered, shaking her head. Karen's murmurs might have gone unnoticed had it not been for her escalating body language. She began gathering her belongings, her novel, her water bottle placing them in her bag with sharp, deliberate movements. Her irritation was palpable, and a few people nearby began to take notice. A man sitting one chair over glanced in her direction, raising an eyebrow but saying nothing. A woman to her right pulled out her phone, scrolling absently but casting the occasional curious glance at Karen. Still, Karen's gaze never wavered from the Johnson family. Every laugh, every splash, every carefree moment seemed to fuel her internal fire. And as the minutes passed, her muttering turned into quiet but audible comments. "It's always the same," she said, shaking her head. "They come in, act like they own the place, and no one does anything." The Johnsons remained blissfully unaware of Karen's growing resentment. Marcus had joined the kids in the pool, pretending to be a sea monster, while Jaden and Maya squealed with delight. Rachel, ever the planner, was busy organizing their lunch setup, pulling out sandwiches and juice boxes from the cooler. Karen's patience was wearing thin. Each moment she watched the family enjoy themselves felt like an affront to her sense of order, her belief in who belonged and who didn't. She glanced around the pool again, hoping for validation from the other patrons, but most were either too polite or too indifferent to respond. For Karen, that only made it worse. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, her voice rising above the ambient noise. "Does anyone even enforce the rules anymore?" A few heads turned her way, but no one replied. The growing silence around her seemed to amplify her indignation, and Karen decided she would have to take matters into her own hands. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes gleamed with a troubling sense of purpose. Karen reached for her phone, her fingers moving with the kind of resolve that comes when someone believes they are unquestionably in the right. The camera lingers on her as she dials, her voice sharp and clipped as she speaks into the phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespassing incident at the community pool," she said. "There's a large family here who clearly doesn't belong. They're causing a scene and making everyone uncomfortable." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the cheerful sounds of the Johnsons' laughter echoing across the pool. What Karen didn't realize was that her actions were about to set off a chain of events far beyond her control, and the consequences would be unlike anything she had imagined. Karen's resentment simmered like a pot left too long on the stove, bubbling over with each passing minute. The Johnson family's laughter and joy, so innocent to everyone else, felt like a challenge to her sense of control. The boundaries she believed she was upholding didn't just define the rules of the pool, they defined who she thought belonged in her world. Unable to hold back any longer, Karen stood abruptly, her bag slung over one shoulder, sunglasses perched firmly on her nose. She straightened her posture, her face set in a mask of determination, and made her way toward the Johnson family's lounge chairs. The scene felt surreal, a woman on a self-appointed mission, marching across the sunlit pool deck with all the authority she believed she possessed. As she approached, Rachel glanced up from her seat, her brow furrowing slightly. Karen stopped a few feet away, her shadow falling over Rachel's chair. Karen cleared her throat, her voice tight and clipped. "Excuse me," she began, her words slicing through the cheerful atmosphere like a blade. "What are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Rachel blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry." "This is a private pool," Karen said, her tone dripping with condescension. "We don't allow visitors here. It's for residents only." Rachel exchanged a quick look with Marcus, who had just returned from the pool with a dripping wet Jaden in tow. She turned back to Karen, her expression calm but firm. "We are residents," Rachel said. "We live just a few blocks away. Is there a problem?" Karen crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Well, I've lived here for years, and I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "We've been members of this pool for 3 summers now," he said. "We come here all the time. Maybe you just haven't noticed us." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Her gaze flicked to the kids, who were now watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes, and then back to Rachel. "Do you have proof of membership?" Karen demanded, her voice growing louder. "Anyone can say they belong, but we have rules for a reason. If you don't have your membership card, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." Rachel took a slow breath, keeping her composure despite the rising tension. "I don't carry my card around while I'm swimming, but it's on file with the front office. Feel free to check with them." Karen's expression hardened, her cheeks flushing with irritation. "How convenient," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Rachel and Marcus to hear. Marcus stepped forward, his tone steady but firm. "Look, we're not here to cause any trouble. We're just trying to enjoy a day with our kids, like everyone else. If you're so concerned, you're welcome to speak to the lifeguard or the front office. But we're not going anywhere." Karen's eyes darted around, noticing that several other pool-goers were now watching the scene unfold. Some were whispering to each other, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Others avoided eye contact, pretending to focus on their books or phones, unwilling to intervene. The attention only fueled Karen's indignation. She wasn't just confronting a family. She told herself she was defending the integrity of the community. They probably snuck in, Karen thought, her internal voice dripping with judgment. No way they could afford to live in this neighborhood. People like them always find a way to cut corners. She glanced back at Rachel, who was now kneeling to reassure Maya and Jaden, their young faces filled with confusion and unease. Karen's voice rose, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "I'm sorry, but this isn't personal. We just have to maintain standards here. If we let anyone in, it won't be long before this place turns into chaos." Rachel stood, her gaze steady and unyielding. "It is personal when you single out my family for no reason. We've done nothing wrong, and you have no right to question us like this." The strength in Rachel's voice caused a ripple through the crowd. A few people nodded subtly in agreement, while others glanced at Karen with growing skepticism. Karen, however, wasn't ready to back down. She felt the heat of judgment from the other patrons, but convinced herself it wasn't directed at her. "They'll thank me later," she thought. "I'm just saying what everyone else is too scared to say." The tension hung heavy in the air, the scene teetering on the edge of escalation. Karen turned on her heel, marching toward the lifeguard stand, her voice cutting through the summer air. "Excuse me. Can we get some confirmation here about who's supposed to be in this pool?" The lifeguard, a college-aged young man, looked startled as Karen approached. He glanced between her and the Johnson family, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Rachel shook her head, her voice low but firm as she spoke to Marcus. "This is unbelievable. She's not going to stop until she feels like she's won." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let her dig her own hole," he said quietly. "The truth will come out." And yet, the Johnsons couldn't ignore the growing discomfort, the stares from strangers who didn't know the full story, but were already forming opinions. As Karen continued her tirade, more people began recording the scene on their phones, their silent protests speaking louder than words. What Karen didn't realize was that her actions were no longer just about a family at the pool. They were becoming a spectacle, a public display of prejudice that would soon spiral out of her control. Karen's frustration boiled over into full-blown indignation. She had tried to reason with them, or so she convinced herself, but nothing had worked. The Johnsons' calm composure only fed her anger, making her feel as though she was losing control of the situation. Clutching her phone tightly, Karen stepped away from the poolside, her expression one of steely determination. As she dialed the police, she glanced back at the Johnson family, her glare sharp and filled with a sense of smug righteousness. The call connected. "Hello. Yes, I'd like to report an incident at the community pool," she said, her voice taking on a tone of urgency. "There's a large group here trespassing. They're refusing to leave and are starting to get aggressive. It's scaring everyone." Her words were deliberate, each one chosen to paint the Johnsons in the worst possible light. "Yes, it's a private pool. They're not members. I'm certain of it. Can you send someone quickly?" As she hung up, Karen's face shifted into a self-satisfied smirk. She returned to her lounge chair, sitting with her arms crossed, as though she had already won. The camera pans to the Johnsons, who are now fully aware of Karen's actions. Rachel sat on the edge of her lounge chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles whitening as she fought to maintain her composure. Marcus stood nearby, his shoulders squared, exuding a quiet strength, even as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. "Mom," Maya whispered, tugging on Rachel's arm. "Why did that lady call the police?" "What did we do?" Rachel forced a reassuring smile, though her voice was tight with emotion. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes people just don't understand." Jaden looked up at his father, his young face clouded with confusion. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" Marcus knelt down, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "No, buddy, we're not in trouble. We're just going to stay calm and let the truth speak for itself." Meanwhile, other poolgoers had begun to take notice of Karen's actions. Some watched in silence, their expressions betraying a mix of discomfort and disapproval. Others had their phones out, quietly recording the interaction, their murmurs growing louder. "Is she serious?" One woman whispered to her husband. "She called the police on them? For what?" "They're just sitting here like everyone else," he replied, shaking his head. A young man holding a camera leaned over to his friend. "This is wild," he said. "She's going to regret this. You can't just call the cops on people for no reason anymore." The murmurs spread, rippling through the crowd like an undercurrent of dissent. Minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the summer air, growing louder as a police car pulled up to the pool's parking lot. The crowd fell silent, their collective tension palpable as two officers stepped out of the vehicle. Karen stood immediately, waving them over as though she were the one in charge. "Officers. "Over here," she called, her voice brimming with faux relief. The police approached, their expressions neutral but professional as they scanned the scene. One officer, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, nodded to Karen. "What seems to be the issue, Mom?" Karen launched into her version of events, her words coming fast and dramatic. "There's a family here who doesn't belong. They've been trespassing, and when I tried to address it, they got hostile. It's making everyone uncomfortable." The officer raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking to the Johnsons, who were sitting quietly by their lounge chairs. "Hostile, you say?" he asked, his tone even. "Yes," Karen insisted. "They refused to show proof of membership, and when I confronted them, they started causing a scene." The officer turned to the Johnsons, his demeanor softening. "Good afternoon," he said. "I understand there's been some sort of misunderstanding. Can we talk for a moment?" Rachel nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Of course, officer. We're happy to cooperate." She reached into her bag and pulled out her membership card, handing it over without hesitation. The officer inspected it, his brow furrowing slightly as he glanced back at Karen. Marcus stepped forward, speaking evenly. "We've lived in this neighborhood for years. We're members here, just like everyone else. We're not sure why she's targeting us, but we haven't done anything wrong." The officer nodded again, his expression thoughtful. He turned to Karen. "Mom, this membership card appears valid. They're listed as residents here." Karen's face reddened, but she refused to back down. "Well, how do you know it's theirs? Anyone can grab a card and pretend to belong." The officer raised a hand, signaling for her to calm down. "Mom, I think it's best if we take a moment to sort this out without jumping to conclusions. Can you explain what exactly they've done that made you feel unsafe?" Karen stammered, her confidence wavering. "Well, they were loud and disruptive. It just seemed suspicious." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, who had been quietly observing the scene. "Being loud at a pool doesn't constitute a crime," he said gently, but firmly. "From what I can see, they haven't done anything wrong." Karen's mouth opened and closed, her indignation faltering in the face of the officer's calm reasoning. Behind her, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, the weight of public opinion beginning to shift. One bystander, emboldened by the officer's tone, spoke up. "They've been sitting there minding their business the whole time. She's the only one causing a scene." Another chimed in, "I've been watching this unfold. She's been harassing them since they got here." Karen turned sharply, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Excuse me? You don't know what you're talking about." The officer raised a hand again, his tone firm. "Mom, I think it's time we de-escalate this situation. From what I'm seeing, there's no issue here. Let's all take a moment to cool down." As Karen's protests grew quieter, the Johnsons exchanged a quiet look of relief. The truth was beginning to shine through, but the day was far from over. Karen's actions had already set a course that would lead to consequences she couldn't have anticipated. The pool was no longer a place of relaxation. It had become a stage for an unfolding drama that no one could ignore. The once scattered murmurs of bystanders now grew louder, braver, and more direct. A woman in her mid-30s, sitting near the pool's edge with her 2 young children, stood and addressed Karen, her voice firm. "Karen, I've seen the Johnsons here every summer," she said, her tone carrying the weight of her frustration. "They're good people. What you're doing is uncalled for." Karen turned sharply, her expression a mix of shock and indignation. "I was just trying to protect the community," she snapped, her voice defensive. "Protect it from what?" Another neighbor interjected, a man in his early 40s who had been quietly observing the scene. "A family enjoying a day at the pool. Come on, Karen. This is embarrassing." As the voices of the crowd began to rise, one bystander, a teenager sitting under an umbrella, pointed their phone directly at Karen. They had been recording the entire ordeal, their fingers deftly navigating their phone as they prepared to go live on social media. With a tap, the live stream began, the camera focusing on the heated exchange. "All right, everyone," the teen whispered into the mic. "We've got a full-blown Karen situation here at the community pool. She called the cops on this black family, and it's not looking good for her." Within moments, the livestream started to gain traction. Comments flooded the screen, a mix of outrage and disbelief, typical Karen behavior. "This is disgusting. Leave those people alone. We need to hold people like this accountable. Shame on her." The teen tilted the camera slightly to capture Karen's face as she argued with the officers, oblivious to the fact that she was now the subject of a rapidly spreading viral video. Meanwhile, Rachel and Marcus stayed close to their children, doing their best to shield them from the commotion. Maya clutched her mother's hand tightly, her young face clouded with confusion. "Mom," she whispered, "why is everyone so upset? Rachel knelt down, her voice soft but steady. Sometimes people make bad choices because they don't understand or they're scared. But we're okay, Maya. We're strong. And the truth is on our side. Jaden, standing close to his father, tugged on Marcus's shirt. What are we going to go home, Dad? Marcus crouched down to his son's level, a reassuring smile on his face. Not until we've had our fun, buddy. This is our pool, too. The crowd's discontent grew, the voices of support for the Johnson family now far outweighing the few who remained silent. One neighbor, a woman in her 50s who had known Karen for years, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. Karen, you need to stop, she said firmly. This isn't the first time you've caused trouble like this. Enough is enough. Karen's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I'm not causing trouble. She shot back. I'm just trying to make sure the rules are followed. Another neighbor, a man in his late 20s, shook his head. The rules are being followed. You're the only one breaking them by harassing this family. You owe them an apology. As Karen struggled to defend herself, her demeanor began to shift. The confidence and authority she had displayed earlier now faltered under the weight of public scrutiny. I was just protecting the community, she repeated, her voice higher pitched now, almost desperate. How was I supposed to know they were members? A young woman near the pool scoffed. You didn't even ask, you just assumed. That's the problem, Karen. You assumed because of the color of their skin. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the depth of the situation she had created. The teen with the live stream turned the camera toward the growing crowd, narrating the scene for their viewers. This is what happens when people think they can act like this without consequences, they said. We're not just going to let it slide anymore. People like Karen need to be held accountable. As the live stream continued to pick up viewers, the comments poured in faster than the teen could read them. Where's the pool management? They need to kick her out. She needs to be banned from the pool for this. Someone find her social media. We need to call her out. Karen, now fully aware of the phones pointed at her, tried to explain herself to the officers. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she stammered. I thought something was off. The lead officer exchanged a glance with his partner. From what we've gathered so far, it doesn't seem like this family has done anything wrong. In fact, it looks like you've made quite a scene here without cause. Karen's face flushed an even deeper shade of red as the officer's words sank in. She looked around, realizing that the crowd was no longer silent observers, they were witnesses to her actions, and they weren't on her side. The camera cut to the Johnson family, who remained composed despite the chaos around them. Rachel's hand rested gently on Maya's shoulder, her expression a mix of exhaustion and quiet strength. Marcus stood tall beside her, his gaze steady as he addressed the crowd. We didn't come here to cause trouble, he said, his voice carrying across the pool deck. We came here to spend time as a family. That's what this place is supposed to be about, community. The crowd murmured in agreement, their collective support a powerful counter to Karen's earlier hostility. As Karen stood frozen, her defenses crumbling, the weight of her actions began to settle in. What had started as an attempt to assert control had spiraled into a public spectacle, one that would have lasting consequences for her reputation. And yet, this was only the beginning. What Karen didn't realize was that the moment had already escaped her control, spreading far beyond the pool deck and into the wider world of social media, where her actions would soon face an entirely different audience. The police, after thoroughly assessing the situation, made their decision. Calmly, the lead officer approached Karen, his voice professional but firm. Mom, we've looked into your claims, and there's no evidence of trespassing or any wrongdoing by this family. They're valid members of this community pool. I suggest everyone return to enjoying their day. Karen's face flushed with humiliation. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. Instead, the officers turned to the Johnsons, offering them a brief apology for the inconvenience before heading back to their patrol car. As the officers left, the tension around the pool began to dissipate, but Karen's troubles were far from over. Word of the incident spread quickly, thanks to the live stream and recorded videos shared by bystanders. Within hours, the hashtags #PoolKaren and Justice for the Johnsons were trending on social media. Clips of the confrontation circulated online, each one highlighting Karen's escalating hostility and the Johnsons' calm and composed responses. Memes began to surface, mocking Karen's behavior, a picture of Karen with the caption, "Breaking news, lifeguard of racism saves pool from family fun." Another featuring a stock image of a pool with the words, "No trespassing unless Karen says so." Major news outlets picked up the story. The viral videos were featured in online articles and evening broadcasts, each one digging deeper into Karen's actions and the broader issues of racial profiling. News reporters flocked to the pool in the days that followed, eager to speak with anyone who had been present. Witnesses provided context, painting a picture of Karen's history within the community. One neighbor, a middle-aged man named Tom, spoke candidly. "This isn't the first time Karen's pulled something like this," he said. "She's always been quick to judge people she doesn't think fit in. But this time she crossed the line." Another resident, a young woman named Emily, added, "It's heartbreaking to think that the Johnsons, who were some of the kindest people in this neighborhood, had to go through something like this. It's not right." The Johnson family was eventually approached for an interview by a local news station. Sitting together on their living room couch, they shared their perspective on the incident. Rachel, her voice calm but resolute, said, "We moved to this neighborhood because we believed in the idea of community, of people looking out for one another. But what happened that day reminded us that prejudice doesn't just disappear. It takes work from everyone to create a truly inclusive space." Marcus nodded, adding, "We just want to enjoy our lives without being judged for who we are. That's not too much to ask." Maya, sitting between her parents, spoke softly but firmly. "I just didn't understand why someone would think we didn't belong. But my mom and dad told me to stay strong and be proud of who I am. That's what I'm trying to do." As the story gained traction, Karen's life began to spiral out of control. Her neighbors, many of whom had previously tolerated her behavior, now openly confronted her. A neighborhood meeting was called, where residents voiced their concerns directly to Karen. "Karen, you've embarrassed this entire community," one woman said, her voice tinged with anger. "We're all being painted as intolerant because of your actions. It's time you take responsibility." Karen, visibly uncomfortable, attempted to defend herself. "I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I thought I was doing the right thing." But her excuses fell flat. "The right thing?" Another neighbor interjected. "You called the police on a family for no reason. That's not protecting the community, that's targeting people because of their race." The viral video eventually reached Karen's employer, a well-known real estate firm that prided itself on diversity and inclusion. Within days, the company released a public statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our employees, Karen, last name. The behavior displayed in the widely circulated video does not align with our company's values of respect and equality. Effective immediately, Karen is no longer employed with our organization." The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. Karen, now jobless and socially ostracized, became the subject of intense scrutiny. Her attempts to explain herself in interviews only made matters worse. "I was just trying to look out for the rules," she said during one televised segment. "I never meant to hurt anyone." The interviewer pressed further. "But do you acknowledge that your actions were based on assumptions about the Johnson family?" Karen faltered, her expression betraying the weight of her guilt. I didn't think about it that way at the time. I see now that I made a mistake. But by then, it was too late. The damage had been done, both to Karen's reputation and to the community's trust." Karen's actions serve as a stark reminder of the harm caused by prejudice and the importance of standing against it. For the Johnson family, the experience was painful, but it also sparked a conversation, one that challenged a community to confront its own biases and work toward genuine inclusion. And for Karen, the consequences of her choices will linger as a lesson, not just for her, but for anyone tempted to judge others based on assumptions. Because in today's world, the truth has a way of coming to light, and justice, even if delayed, has a way of finding its mark. The Johnson family could have chosen to retreat, to avoid further confrontation, and live quietly in the wake of the ordeal. But they didn't. Instead, they decided to transform their pain into purpose. Rachel and Marcus spent the days following the incident discussing how they could address the deeper issues exposed by Karen's actions. The answer became clear: the community needed to have a conversation about racism, bias, and inclusivity. Rachel and Marcus worked tirelessly to organize a neighborhood meeting, inviting all the residents of the community. They created flyers titled "Building a Better Community," a conversation about inclusivity, and distributed them door to door. At first, there was hesitation. Some neighbors feared the meeting would be too confrontational, while others worried about reopening wounds. But the Johnsons assured everyone that the goal was unity, not division. "We're not here to point fingers," Marcus said in one of the invitations. "We're here to build understanding and make our community stronger." By the day of the meeting, the community center was packed. People of all ages filled the room, some curious, others apprehensive, but all aware of the importance of the discussion. The atmosphere was solemn as Rachel stepped to the front of the room, holding a microphone. Her voice was steady, but the emotion in her words was unmistakable. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We didn't plan to become the center of a viral story, and we certainly didn't expect to face what we did at the pool that day. But instead of letting it divide us, we want to use this moment to bring us together. She shared the family's experience, not with anger, but with a desire to educate. Racism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's in the assumptions we make or the actions we take without thinking. That's why we're here, to learn from each other and to do better. The most poignant moment of the meeting came when Maya and Jaden, with their parents' encouragement, stepped forward to share their feelings. Maya, clutching the microphone tightly, took a deep breath before speaking. "I didn't understand why someone thought we didn't belong," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "It made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't deserve to be there." She paused, glancing at her younger brother for support. "But my mom and dad told me that what happened wasn't my fault. They said we belong anywhere we want to be, just like anyone else, and I want everyone to remember that." Jaden, though shy, spoke up next. "It made me sad," he admitted, looking down at his feet. "But my dad said we're strong, and we can make things better. I just want people to be nice to each other." The room was silent, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. Many attendees wiped away tears, moved by the bravery and honesty of the children. After the emotional testimonies, Marcus presented practical steps the community could take to foster inclusivity. He handed out a list of resources, including books, articles, and online workshops on understanding implicit bias and promoting diversity. "This isn't just about what happened to us," Marcus said. "It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome, where no one has to question if they belong. That's the kind of community I want my kids to grow up in, and I think it's the kind of community we all want." Rachel added, "We also encourage everyone to think about how we handle conflicts like this in the future. Maybe it's time to establish clear policies for our shared spaces, so no one feels targeted or excluded." The attendees responded with a mix of apologies, support, and commitments to change. One neighbor, an elderly man who had initially stayed silent during the pool incident, stood up and addressed the Johnsons directly. "I didn't say anything that day, and I regret it," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I promise you I'll never stay silent again. What happened to you was wrong, and I'll do my part to make sure it doesn't happen again." Another resident, a young mother, added, "This meeting opened my eyes to things I didn't even realize I was doing. I'll be teaching my kids to be more aware, too. Thank you for your courage." As the meeting drew to a close, the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to one of hope. Attendees lingered, engaging in heartfelt conversations and offering their thanks to the Johnsons. The family stood together, accepting the support with grace. Rachel hugged Maya and Jaden tightly, whispering, "You both did so well. I'm so proud of you." Marcus looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and optimism. "This is how change starts," he thought to himself, one conversation at a time. The Johnson family could have chosen to stay silent, to move on and leave the painful incident behind. But instead, they stood up not just for themselves, but for their entire community. Their bravery sparked a ripple effect, opening hearts and minds and challenging long-held biases. In their determination to turn pain into progress, the Johnsons reminded everyone of an essential truth, that even in the face of prejudice, hope and unity can prevail. And as the meeting ended and the community began to heal, one thing was clear: this neighborhood would never be the same again. It was on its way to becoming something better. Despite the viral fallout, Karen knew her reputation was in ruins. The weight of the community's response, the loss of her job, and the online backlash left her isolated. But amidst the chaos, one thing remained clear in her mind: she needed to apologize. She couldn't let the situation go without some form of redemption. Karen arranged a public apology, posting a video on her social media accounts. It was an attempt to salvage what little was left of her dignity, but the sincerity of her words was questioned by many. In the video, she looked directly into the camera, her face pale, her eyes red from tears. "I want to sincerely apologize to the Johnson family and to anyone I may have hurt. My actions were wrong, and I now realize the harm I caused. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I deeply regret that." But the Johnsons, having already faced the harshness of her prejudice, were not quick to accept her apology. The pain caused by her actions could not be undone by a few words. Rachel was approached by a reporter shortly after the apology surfaced online. She was asked about her thoughts on Karen's attempt to make amends. "I appreciate the apology," Rachel began, her voice calm but resolute. "But forgiveness is one thing, and accountability is another. Words are important, but they are not enough. What matters now are the actions Karen takes to prove she has learned from this and to show that she's committed to change." The camera captured her steady gaze as she added, "Forgiveness takes time. It's something that has to be earned through consistent, meaningful actions. not just apologies. Marcus, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. We've always said we're not seeking revenge. We want accountability, and we want the community to learn from this. If Karen is truly sorry, she'll show it through her actions, how she treats others moving forward. As the weeks passed, Karen's apology seemed to fade into the background. What took its place, however, was a noticeable shift within the community, a shift that had been sparked by the Johnsons' courage and advocacy. The neighborhood association, encouraged by the Johnsons, formed a committee to address issues of racism and bias. The committee's first task was to implement more thorough training for pool staff and other community service workers on diversity and inclusivity. They also began drafting new guidelines for behavior and reporting incidents of discrimination, ensuring that everyone had a clear and accessible way to address such issues in the future. At local schools, workshops on tolerance and respect became a regular part of the curriculum. Teachers incorporated lessons on implicit bias, and students were encouraged to engage in open dialogues about race, prejudice, and empathy. Maya and Jaden, having already taken their first brave step by speaking at the meeting, were invited to participate in some of these discussions, sharing their experiences and the importance of standing up against injustice. The momentum built by the Johnsons' efforts didn't stop with policies. It reached the heart of the community. More residents began to engage in meaningful conversations about racism, bias, and understanding. People who had once remained silent in the face of prejudice now stood up and spoke out. Neighbors who had been hesitant to confront Karen's actions started to reflect on their own behavior, realizing how they, too, had allowed small acts of prejudice to slide by unchecked. The Johnsons' efforts to build a more inclusive and compassionate neighborhood became a guiding light for everyone. As the video began to near its conclusion, the visuals transitioned into a montage of the positive changes taking place in the community. Residents gathered for a town hall meeting, discussing diversity initiatives and ways to further support each other. Maya and Jaden were seen leading a group of young children in a diversity workshop, teaching them about kindness and inclusion. At the community pool, families of all backgrounds were laughing and chatting together, enjoying the space that had once been a source of division. Karen, in an attempt to show genuine remorse, was seen volunteering at a local charity event. Though her past actions had left a mark, she began to take small steps toward mending her reputation, one act of service at a time. In the face of hate, this family chose courage and compassion. They didn't let one person's prejudice define them. Instead, they turned their pain into a powerful force for good, bringing their community together in ways no one could have predicted. The Johnson story is a reminder that every action has consequences, and that kindness, understanding, and empathy can break down the walls of hatred, one conversation at a time. So let this story be a beacon of how even in the darkest moments, there is a path to redemption, growth, and healing. And that, in the end, love and unity will always triumph over fear and division. The final screen fades to black, with soft instrumental music playing in the background. The credits roll, thanking the contributors, the Johnson family, and all those who stood up for justice and inclusivity. As the credits end, a final message appears: stand up, speak out, make a difference. To create a fuller picture of the situation, the video shifts focus to Karen's background, using flashbacks to explore how her prejudices were shaped by her upbringing. This adds a layer of complexity, showing viewers that these biases are not born overnight but are ingrained over time. This approach also keeps viewers invested in the larger story arc while adding emotional depth. The video cuts to black and white flashback scenes showing Karen growing up in a homogeneous, predominantly white suburban neighborhood. Young Karen, around 10 years old, is seen in moments with her parents, who express overtly racist comments about people of different races. Karen's father, flashback, Karen, people like that don't belong in places like ours. Karen's mother, flashback, just remember, it's best to stay with your own kind. The world is a dangerous place if you don't know your place. As the flashbacks continue, Karen's teenage years are revealed in a school setting where she laughs at racially insensitive jokes, subtly signaling that these biases are being reinforced in her life. The final flashback shows Karen in her early adulthood, subtly making disparaging remarks about non-white people at a work gathering. We see a turning point. The first time Karen stands by as a colleague of color is belittled, her silence marking a shift in her complicity. As the flashbacks fade, an expert in psychology or sociology is introduced, speaking to the camera. The expert explains how prejudices are often learned behaviors, not inherent traits. Expert psychologist: many times, prejudice is learned in childhood. Whether it's from our family, our communities, or even the media we consume, these biases can become deeply ingrained. It's important to remember that no one is born racist. Bias is a product of social conditioning, and while it's difficult to break free from those patterns, it's not impossible. It's about education, awareness, and a willingness to unlearn harmful behaviors. This expert commentary ties in with the earlier flashbacks and deepens the understanding of why Karen behaved the way she did, humanizing her while also showing how damaging these learned behaviors can be. To continue building empathy and engagement, the video cuts to an emotional, raw interview with the Johnson family. The family members each reflect on their personal feelings, both during the incident and in the weeks following. Rachel, teary-eyed, it was the look in Maya's eyes when she asked me why we were being treated like that. She didn't understand. And how could she? Why should she even have to? That's what broke me. But I realized that it wasn't just about us. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what we did. Marcus's interview. Marcus, as a father, you want to protect your kids. But that day I felt powerless. I wanted to confront Karen and tell her she was wrong. But I knew that would just make things worse. I had to stay calm for them, for my family. The hardest part was knowing that we were being judged for no reason other than the color of our skin. I never want my kids to feel like that again. Both Maya and Jaden are asked about the emotional impact of the event. Maya speaks first, recalling how it felt to be questioned in such a demeaning way. Maya pauses, voice trembling. It made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I didn't belong. But then my mom told me that no one could take away my worth. I didn't want to cry, but I did, because I just didn't understand why someone would treat us that way. Jaden, though young, speaks with a maturity beyond his years. Jaden, I just want people to stop being mean. It's not right. I don't want to be scared to go places anymore, just because of the color of my skin. Their voices provide a gut punch of raw emotion that keeps viewers emotionally invested in the family's journey. To keep the story fresh and current, the video includes a section on the viral nature of the incident and the public's reaction on social media. It effectively uses real-time commentary to showcase the extent of the backlash Karen faced and the support the Johnson family received. The screen splits into multiple segments, showing tweets, Instagram stories, and Facebook posts about the incident. Hashtags like Pool Karen and Justice for the Johnsons trend nationwide. Some posts highlight moments of solidarity, while others mock Karen with memes and viral videos. Tweet appears on screen. This is why we need to teach kids empathy and respect from the start. What happened to the Johnson family is a tragedy, but they're showing us how to respond with dignity. We stand with you. Instagram story, a video clip of the Johnson family at the pool, juxtaposed with a viral meme of Karen's earlier meltdown, highlighting the stark contrast in how the two were treated. Facebook comment, Karen should be ashamed of herself. Racism like this has no place in 2024. Thank you to the Johnsons for showing grace in the face of hate. End racism. This section builds a powerful connection between the real-world impact of racism and how public opinion can shift, with social media playing a critical role in holding people accountable. To wrap up the video, the camera cuts back to the expert who was introduced earlier, but now they speak specifically on systemic racism and the microaggressions that fuel incidents like the one at the pool. Expert sociologist, what happened to the Johnsons is an example of how systemic racism works. It's not just about one person's prejudice, it's about a larger structure that allows these types of incidents to happen. Microaggressions are often invisible. They're the everyday slights, the quiet judgments that build up over time. It's crucial to understand that these biases are not isolated. They exist in our schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Recognizing them is the first step in dismantling them. The expert goes on to explain how microaggressions like Karen's assumptions about the Johnson family's membership are a manifestation of broader societal issues, encouraging viewers to reflect on their own actions and biases. As the expert finishes speaking, the camera fades to a final message on the screen. Change starts with us. Let's stand together, speak out against hate, and build communities of understanding. The video ends with a final montage of community members participating in positive actions, attending workshops, engaging in inclusive conversations, and showing unity. In the credits, a call to action is displayed, encouraging viewers to join local movements, participate in community discussions on racism, and educate themselves on anti-racism efforts. A link to resources is also provided, guiding the audience toward organizations dedicated to making a change.